Welcome to the place of rest, where our aim is to give you language that helps you displace the growing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our times. In today's episode, Virginia discusses how reconciling our internal spiritual and psychological conflicts through absolute truth is the only path to genuine healing and societal order. We hope you enjoy today's conversation.
There are parasites, there are things that are always threatening to afflict us. And if we are not keenly aware of the confusion, chaos, and dis-ease in the different terrains of our life, the spiritual, the psychological, and the physical, and these are different spheres of influence, structures of authority. These are different terrains that must be independently dependent on each other. And if we don't begin to think differently about the things that afflict us without just damning and condemning each other's brokenness and depravity and weak character and conscience, we're never going to get out of the mess we find ourselves in. Because see, it's easy to say this, not one single one of these politicians is trustworthy. Not one single sphere of influence and structure of authority around us that we trust, we pay taxes to protect us, not one of them are worthy of our affections, of our attention, of our support. So we're going to sit this out and do nothing. Then you don't understand the evil that is upon us, because everything you just judged, this fallen pastor, this fallen athlete, the fallen executive, the fallen mother, the fallen father, the rebellious child, whatever. I don't care. Name the person, name the post, name the position, name the politician. If we do not stop thinking about the fall from grace or the fall of people that let us down with measures of compassion and humility, with only judgment, shame, and condemnation, if we do not stop this spiral, we're going to self-destruct. Because the things that are afflicting individuals, families, communities, states, and institutions is unprecedented. And it's unprecedented because it's compounded over the last 40, 50 years to this state. Unprecedented, compounding and unprecedented confusion, chaos, and dis-ease that now has become so blatant, so pervasive, so invasive, so destructive, that now we are all like a firing squad when we're being afflicted by the same things that we're condemning. So if we don't begin to engage in these conversations with measures of humility, we're self-destructing. There's a beautiful passage in Romans, and I love Romans 1. I think it's one of my, I say this about every time I read something in the Bible, I think, oh, this is my favorite. This is my favorite. Oh, this is the best. This is the most comprehensive. And I think it speaks to the power and to the authority of the spoken word and how it accounts for the human condition. Because when you read, if you will, this ancient document that really tells a story of a civilization much like our own, it gives us an account of what was happening in Rome thousands of years ago. And it was a generation very much like our own. And what had happened is man became a law unto himself. And they began to forfeit the appropriate uses of their bodies for things that were not suitable, that brought about and generated confusion, chaos, and dis-ease that ultimately began to manifest in the destruction of a family and the fall of a nation. So the whole concept of the Republic of Rome began to implode. Well, shoot, that sounds like what's happening in America. And we began to exchange the natural uses of our bodies, if you will, for unnatural uses. And I don't want to get into how disgusting and how vile that is, because I think we're all aware of it, because it's afflicted and affected and infected much of our existence, many of our lives, and destroyed many of our marriages and our children and our spouses and our families and our communities and our nation. We can just turn on the news and see evidence of this. But isn't this the same narrative that caused the fall of nations 4,000 years since the beginning of time? We see that in Egypt. We see that in Babylon. We see that among the Assyrians, and of course, Greece and Rome. And it's when man becomes a law unto himself without taking into account the limitations, right, of their own parts. The Spirit speaks to all of us. We hear it. Psst, psst, don't do that. That's not a good idea. But then our mind, our heart, our will, our conscience negotiates all that. Nobody will know. Just this once. Or it's not that big of a deal. This isn't going to hurt anybody else. This is only going to affect me. Really? You are making agreements against your better judgment. Spiritually, psychologically, and then you get stuck into the web of shame and condemnation and regret in the psychological part of your being. Well, guess what? If you don't reconcile it, if you don't reconcile the confusion, chaos, and disease now that's compounding and afflicting you, it's only a matter of time before it does what? It gets flushed down into your body. And there the dam breaks. And then we start feeling not well. We're tired. We're depressed. We're anxious. If we're lucky, that's it. If we don't mitigate that beyond drugs, alcohol, porn, chewing glass, shopping, you name it, it's going to turn into a diseased state in your body, and it's going to lodge in a very specific organ. And according to where it lodges, for example, in that very specific organ, we can reverse engineer where the confusion, chaos, and disease came from. And if we catch it in time, we see spontaneous remissions and we see healings. But that's the anatomy of the disintegration that can take place. And I took it from existential, global patterns and rhythms into here we go, into disease states of a person's body. So it's an invitation to reconcile a conflict. People of all ages listen to our podcast, and I just wonder, even a child can understand the concepts that we're talking about because they go and get their hand in a cookie jar they know they're not supposed to. Decisions have consequences. I guess that's it. And we have many, many opportunities extended to us that we call grace and the ecosystem of grace. We live in the era of grace, but the age of rest. You can leverage these things to put a hard stop to the things that are afflicting you and destroying you. And it's not going to come without a cost. It's the same discipline we talk about these athletes in the World Cup that they've had to develop to press through, leverage through the difficult things in their lives that threaten to drown them at every turn. They said, no, not on my watch, not in time. I will not be this. I will not become this. And some of them, of course, in the height of the seduction of their career and whatnot, fell. But they still left a beautiful story of triumph and how the Holy Spirit can triumph through despair, and that can be the enduring voice of a generation. But the height of your success is not the end of your story. Actually, it's perhaps the most perilous time of our story. So we need to be careful with those things. We have a lot of accountability systems established here at R.E.S.T, and all of us have made enormous sacrifices to launch this global initiative. But we don't look back. We only look up. We don't look up. We don't look down. We don't look to the right. We don't look to the left. We only look up. We can't even look ahead, or we'd be terrified and wouldn't want to take another step. And we can't look back, because then we have to continuously reference our stupidity, our ignorance. The dumpster we were in, dumbfounded and in a state of inactivity, and the stupor we, by the grace of God, survived. But at all of those junctures, none of us doubled down on our ignorance, on the dumbfounded state we were in, nor in the stupidity we found ourselves in. We all bent the knee and discussed with one another principles of rest that continue to help us advance and take back territory of the encroaching darkness that is upon us. It'll show up in their relationships. It'll show up in their conscience. It'll show up in their addictions. It'll show up in the character and conscience with which they show up to work. There's always a leak. It may not show up in a disease state or illness, but it will show up in dis-ease and confusion and chaos. But they negotiate with their own ignorance. They compromise the dumbfounded state they're in and relegated to the pile of the unknown. Well, who knows? And then the stupor, they rationalize the stupor that they find themselves in. If they double down on all those things, they're going to live as fools. And foolishness is terrifying when you live as a fool, because you don't live curious about your own ignorance, your own stupor, and your own state of being dumbfounded by many things. Instead, you deceive yourself and others by pretending to be an authority or angry or outraged about topics, ideas, political agendas that you know you live in the contradiction of. And that's what we see. That's why we see the left outraged. And I invite everyone listening, this isn't anything other than a law of nature. You got to ask yourself, who's doing the yelling? Who's doing the screaming? Who's burning down the cities? And who's destroying character, conscience, and integrity of their opponents? Who is burning down their own towns? Who's destroying their own property? And who is screaming? Because that person, whatever side they're on, they've lost the narrative. Who's calm? Who's engaging in conversation? Who's provoking thought? Who's inviting people to recognize the contradictions that they walk in? Who's inviting somebody to consider that perhaps the things they're talking about are not accurate or truthful? You got to see these things, whether in a relationship, whether in a family, whether in a business. I'm getting ready to go into back-to-back-to-back meetings the rest of the day. I can pierce through the darkness that could derail my team and my company in a nanosecond by paying attention to the heart, the mind, the will, the conscience with which my team members approach challenges. We don't talk about problems. We say problems or possibilities, but possibilities. And I can tell what's happening, and I don't allow those arguments to fester or to derail our conversations, because I already know that person's conflicted, especially if they show up accusing. If they show up blaming the Federal Express guy, Amazon, if there's always a blame, I know that they're covering, hiding, and they violated their own conscience in something. They're confused about something, and they're believing a lie about something. So obviously we live understanding how to apply these principles that we teach. So I'm able to get to the anatomy of the problem very quickly. Everybody here knows there's a reason for things, but don't give me excuses. When you always have a reason, that's an excuse, and you're desecrating yourself and all of us. You're desecrating yourself and you're bringing destruction upon you and the team and our imperatives. But because we all have learned to think along the lines of this, we're gently able to keep ourselves and each other out of those ditches. If we're showing up to these meetings and contradicting our imperatives, then we're destroying the very thing we're trying to do. So we're going to be stuck like in a bay. So people have to have enough curiosity about what is true, what is without contradiction. Okay. So people, we individually have to take responsibility to get to the bottom of what is true. I talk about reading the Federalist Papers and knowing somebody's lying. Well, because I went and read primary sources. They documented what they lived, what they saw, what they gave their property, their wealth, their life, their blood for, understanding that that signature was going to cost them their life. So when I feel conviction about something, or if I begin to become very argumentative and posture on something, I already know that I'm conflicted. Because why do I have to disparage the opinion of another person to make my point? And I lived in that like we all do for many years, right? Because we're young, we're foolish, we're immature, and we're in a stupor. We find ourselves in stupors. The thing that I've never done is I don't double down on ignorance or on stupidity. Never. I follow it up with curiosity. That doesn't mean I haven't been offensive to people and my kids and in my family. We all talk straight about things. But it also, you can bet your bottom dollar that I also go back and say, hey, I'm sorry about that. By the way, you were right about that. The reason that's, or sometimes, one of my children might be mourning something or feeling shame about something. And I immediately say, honey, I'm so thankful to be alive to hear you say that, because I'm going to tell you, I think that, but I say the root of that in you was me, because I didn't have the strength, the faith, the courage, or the wisdom. I was in a stupor. I was ignorant about the things that I understand today. So release that, because that is coming to you from me. And I just say, honestly, in Jesus' name and by the power and authority of the Holy Spirit, I just break that from my children. In my private prayer life, I know that some of their afflictions are agreements that I made because of my own ignorance and my own stupidity, and that I passed on a yoke of slavery to my children that they now walk in. And I take responsibility for that privately. I can't vomit that on them many times because they'll think, what the hell, my mom's lost her mind. But I have in more moderate, condensed form say, would you forgive me? That's from me. And I didn't know better, but I know better now. Do not be enslaved by the things that deceived me. Don't send your kids to a therapist. Don't put them on medications. Don't take them to a doctor. Engage them into a curious conversation about the things that are afflicting them. Because the things that are afflicting them are causing your children to hate themselves. Because they don't think they're meeting up to your standards, or they don't think you love them. They don't think they're enough, which is a lie from the pit of hell. Their shortcomings are often the direct result of your own afflictions. Take responsibility, break the yoke of slavery, destroy those generational curses that you've passed on in your own well-intending pilgrimage, and they were part of your own heritage that you didn't even know about. We could change the world if we could live by these truths that are self-evident and appeal to our natural affections. Because right now, there's not an honest mom or dad that can say, wow, I never thought about it that way. My greatest and darkest moment could be the most clear, bright opportunity that I have to bend the knee, to stop and think about an affliction that I think belongs to my children, but its root is in me. and I break agreements with that lie, do that privately in your prayer life. It's not them and us. No, it's us and us. All this is happening to all of us. And if we can stop with the judgments that condemn, if you're going to judge to facilitate life and productivity and prosperity, not to shame it and tear it down and desecrate it because you know better. If you're going to do that, you sure as hell better be doing that with yourself first before you embark in doing this with each other. And I'm telling you, these right and left, communist, not communist, these ideas can be evaluated according to their merit. We have history to study. There's not one socialist and communist country in existence that has not been parasitical in the life of its citizens it promises to secure the prosperity for, the life for. Exhibit A, the Soviet Union. Cuba. Exhibit B, Cuba. Maybe Cuba can be Exhibit A. Look what's happening in Cuba. Look what Fidel Castro. Look at what Maduro did in Venezuela. You guys don't have to look very far. Look at our neighboring sister continent, South America. By the way, that's our sister continent. We need to love the South American continent, the South American people like we do our siblings. And we need to understand that providentially we're linked to them. They were conquered. We were settled. We need to start having some compassion. What does it mean when a nation is conquered? Right? What does it mean when a nation is settled? And when you start talking crap on the people that settled America and how we were white supremacists, whatever, just remember that the world is God's and everything in it. And we were all nomads. And everybody is an immigrant to everywhere. That God established men and nations. And the cradle of civilization is in another place far, far away in Africa. That's where it all began. So before we start thinking we're entitled to dispense judgment on the injustices of all these cultures and nations, we better shut our mouth and take inventory of history and become curious about how the earth and the world was populated. Because the world is God's and everything in it. And only when we have pure hearts, clean hands, and a pure heart will we be able to ascend into his presence to understand these bigger ideas. So ask yourself today in the narrative and the false narrative that's taking place in America and globally, who the hell do these leaders and these people think turning us against each other? We're all nomads. We're all immigrants to everything. Because in the beginning, God, not man, in the beginning, God created men and nations for his pleasure, by the way. So we could walk in unison with him and do what? Be fruitful and multiply, subdue, and then govern, dominion. To do what? To expand life, not take it and diminish it. There was a great deception. There was a great fall. And there's a great revolution, for sure. And that's another story for another day. We have a whole module on it. But I feel passionate and I'm so compelled to speak truth to these things because I have science to back up. We have a data-driven, evidence-based program to back up the merit, the ideas, and the framework that we invite you to consider at a very personal, intimate, psychoneuroimmunological level. And we will prove it to you because we will restore the breach in communication between your spirit, your soul, and your body, if you will.
We hope listening to this episode has brought you closer to experiencing the freedom of wholeness and healing. If you have questions or comments about today's episode, or for updates about R.E.S.T, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of R.E.S.T. If you would like more information about Virginia, or to support and join the cause of REST, please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to Rest with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.